And welcome everybody. We're really quite excited just to kind of sit and have a chat with you. I know Dave and I spend what we start off as like a half hour, and we sometimes go to extend beyond 2 hours. So we won't do that here. We'll be super sensitive to everyone's time. But I think first, to kind of set the context, we'll start, Dave, with a little bit of your background and how you ended up in kind of this angel first round investor role.
Okay, thanks, Lisa, and thanks everybody for joining. I guess the simple thing is I had always wanted to be a principal from literally, I think, the time I got out of business school. And I think that a lot of the way I've gotten to where I am today was first skills acquisition, then getting a chance to be able to participate in later stage investments, and then eventually kind of moving into earlier stage investments. And I've told Lisa, it's a kind of semi-amusing story. I moved to a little town called Woodside, California in the early 90s. And we had a group of like 12 of us that would ride bikes every Saturday or Sunday morning. And of that group, 6 of them have turned into multi-billionaires from tech companies that they started. And we would just shoot the breeze about what they were doing and the kind of problems they were solving. And I found that much more interesting than doing late stage investing. So around like 1997, I started to get involved in it. And a lot of it was along the thinking of how the web was going to begin this process of digitalization that's now whatever 20 something years further on, and how much that was going to change the whole way that businesses interacted with their end customers, with their users, how they organize their internal functions, and where the sources of competitive advantage were going to be. So I consider myself to be just a lifelong learner who reads everything I can get my hands on. And because I was fortunate enough to live out in Silicon Valley, got exposed to a lot of these early sort of thought leaders that were kind of coming out of Stanford University or University of California, Berkeley. And no one sort of asked, well, where'd you go to high school? Where'd you go to college? They asked, what are you working on? And if you had a point of view and the interest to kind of help, you could get involved in things at an early stage. And so I did that for, through the internet bubble. I was like successful and I was an idiot. Then I eventually came back and sort of started to do it on with my own family money. And that's how I got into being an angel investor. And I don't know, circa 2008, started up with a friend from Dartmouth, a company that was like a web foodie network. It was like one of the earliest ones. And in 2 years, we grew that long tail site from 0 to 100 million page views per month, and ended up selling it to an early like digital publishing platform. But out of that, I met this guy who couldn't raise a penny at the time, named Ben Silverman, who was the founder of Pinterest, and it was taking the ideas that we had done in Food Buzz, which were along the lines of how could people express themselves in communities where their expertise and insights could be used by businesses to be able to better understand how to serve their customers. And when Ben came, he sort of talked about, well, we're going to do this in food, but we're going to do it in all these other areas. That was, I went, okay, totally get that. And I still remember like a year later, my daughter, who was, I think, like a sophomore in college at the time, goes, hey, Dad, did you invest in that Pinterest thing? She goes, literally, everyone in my class, we get done going to the library and we are posting all of our kind of areas of interest in pictures in the Pinterest platform. And I think it's obviously exceeded well beyond anything I ever believed, but it's this observe what people do and try to think about how it fits into a framework. That's kind of what I try to do all the time.
Excellent. And I like the idea of, we're all about the network here at EE and life. I think it's something that sometimes academia, and when you're a young student kind of saying, I'm in the role of learning, the people side and really keeping those lifelong connections is undervalued. And it seems to be like with technology, another really positive outshoot of this innovation and that network and the power of the network, that we can be connected across the globe. What do you think about kind of the power of the network?
That's absolutely like been critical in my life, right? So I kind of look at it as what the internet's allowed you to do is to discover stuff, because you can just like, go down um, and find people. Like I have probably 20 blogs that I follow literally every day. That's how I start my day, on new things that I can think about.
Mhm.
Then I would kind of go, you can find expertise as you drill down. You could start on like Wikipedia and just keep going to the sites until you find the subject matter expert. And I tend to find people who will talk to you because they're proud of whatever they're doing research in. And that's literally how I learn about things, because I'm a generalist. I'm not a highly technical person, but I figure stuff out. And then I want to try to go one step back the opposite way. Then another thing that's been an important part of my life is maintaining relationships with people from networks that I've been in that have been associated. Like I went to Bowdoin undergrad up in Maine, a great liberal arts college that has created a lot of people who are highly successful in tech and a lot of other things. So I've got a built-in network of people where I can talk to anybody in that group. I did Dartmouth for business school, same sort of thing. There's a huge alumni network that are very open to kind of working with people who are from that background. Then I had kids that went to Duke, kids that went to Georgetown. Each place that I've been, I end up volunteering and starting to build relationships that I'm able to use because they're tight knit community. So it's this combination of, you can research anything with the web. So any person who's trying to think about innovation in a structured way can do that to the degree they're interested in being able to go there. And then, I have, we could talk about it later, but I have a whole bunch of things that I use to be able to be frameworks for how to evaluate things along the lines, Lisa, you were talking about.
Beautiful. And let's go to the Pinterest story. What were some of the things, like you're kind of the first person that really hammered home in a lot of these conversations, like, well, what's the utility in it? Using that word in kind of the same sentences, innovation. What are some of the things that you're looking for that says, oh, you really understand that utility of what you're
Okay,
building?
sure. So like I kind of think that there are two digital business models that are sort of foundational, and I'll cite some examples. Um, so first, you can create a platform, or and maybe an example of a platform, a couple platforms that are like killer, Shopify, or the other one would be Stripe, where they basically create what I'll call a horizontal utility that can be used by anyone who wants to create a digital business model. In the case of Shopify, it's e-commerce. In the case of Stripe, it's the payments on mobile and web kind of digital properties, right? In each case, that allows the person to not waste time building the tech stack that you used to have to build when I first got into the business, and allows them to kind of focus on solving client problems in a meaningful way, right? Now bring that back and sort of say, okay, so how does that compare to Pinterest? Well, what I had done a deal that was called Market Tools, which is now part of SurveyMonkey, that had looked at how to take market research that in the old days was done on phones and whatnot, and put it onto the web. And this would have been like in 1998. Out of that, I got a whole lot of insight into how do consumer packaged goods companies, reach out to their users to be able to find out what's important to them and how they do advertising, concept testing, et cetera, right? As these platforms like Facebook and Google and Pinterest came up and others subsequently, they started to become this repository where people were revealed by what they posted, what their interests were. And because Pinterest or Facebook or Google owns the end user relationship, they started to build fabulous databases where, if you had to buy the insight that people kind of contribute as a byproduct of their interactions, you could never invest enough money. So they all had these advantages where they control relationships with users that anybody who wanted to be a brand could do. So my point to kind of think how this all comes back to innovation is being able to look at making bets on things that can make your business wherever you start from better in a digital world. And I always sort of think that starts with insight into what your customers want and ways to be able to serve them better. And better can be on a number of dimensions. It can be more cost effective. It can be more attuned and anticipatory of like what they might want. And all these digital platforms help you do that. And in Pinterest case, that's why they've been able to grow as much as they have, because for anyone who's in D2C in a variety of the categories that they're involved in, they have a record in depth of what those people do. And then there's a second thing, which is the people who post, the pinners, also start to build relationship networks of other pinners who have similar interests. So you're creating these kind of organic communities of people of like minds. And that allows them to kind of cross-fertilize and spark new ideas and new ways to solve problems because they find kindred spirits. And to me, all these are vectors that, as the world sort of moves more digital, and as the reasons that one had to be in a big company start to go away, you can concentrate on specializing in what I'll call micro communities, figure out what are the essence of them, and then figure out how to scale them in better ways than has been done before.
So a lot of interactions that we sometimes have is going into, more the enterprise, the heritage.
Yep.
They're perceived like, not that they're not cool, but they're not the cool kids on the block. They're trying in some time that modernization and getting some of that entrepreneurial thinking in.
Yep.
You had some thoughts about that entrepreneurial versus intrapreneurial and how we can support like the enterprise can start to move in kind of moving fast and new ways of working.
Right. And I'll try to frame this in two different ways, right? So on the one side, I really do feel like that every large enterprise needs to develop competence in this. And, I can sort of point to that, there's a gazillion blogs I could probably, Lisa, like after, point people to some of them where they can start to educate about the process, right? Several of the large corporations, as a result of all this, all the pandemic, have started to see that they have to change, their processes to become more digital, and it's all under what I'll call an umbrella. That one of the people who I've been most influenced by. There's really two of them. There's a guy named Clayton Christensen, who was a famous business school professor at Harvard, who wrote about disruption theory. And then there's a guy named Ben Thompson, who has a blog called Stratechery that has chronicled all the kind of innovative business models that are out there. So what I sort of feel like bigger corporations have to do is they have to get externally focused and put together, teams to look at all of their fundamental processes in light of how could they change them to be able to better meet customer needs by either getting out there and having conversations with their customers, or spending time outside where they're kind of either investing in startups through some sort of a venture effort, a business development effort of that kind, or basically going and sort of saying that they'll set up their own kind of skunk works on areas that they think are adjacencies that they have some expertise, and create those as either career paths or ways where people can step out. Because I feel like the challenge in large corporations is they've already perfected the ability to be able to serve a group of customers historically. And yet they may have done that in the past, and so they move towards what I guess I call a strategy of efficiency and concentration, and they don't sort of step back and go, well, how could we reimagine our processes to take advantage of these new things that are out there? And it takes senior leaders who basically question every assumption, and then create pathways where those people can be supported and not have it be viewed as a career limiting move to go out and work on these things that could fail, but at least will push the organization to think differently about its fundamental value propositions.
Beautiful. And how do you see where does Pinterest go maybe 10 years from now? How do they stay relevant?
So I think they stay relevant by three things. They have a lot of what I guess I'll call kind of machine learning and early AI. AI gets thrown around too much, but what they're able to do is they have so much data that comes through their kind of data factory, and then they can use neural networks to basically discover like the proverbial needle in the haystack of insight about all these different categories that their users are engaged in. And no one person could be able to organize all this stuff, right? So by leveraging technology on the imaging side and on the relationship side, they start to see where is their kind of like, I'll call it organic primordial soup that helps brands be able to identify people that they can that should be their customers, and then how do they help facilitate that so that so that as a sort of channel for direct to consumer brands, that they can facilitate these relationships that in essence acquire customers that then can be harvested by the brands that kind of work in the Pinterest, in the Pinterest kind of communities. And these communities continue to evolve with the way people's tastes and change, and they get to have a window on that. And I think so long as they kind of can continue to grow their users, and their users find that the insights that they gain from looking at the content that's in Pinterest helps them solve their personal, goals in their creative businesses, then Pinterest will remain relevant as a source of discovery, ideation, and testing of new innovative value propositions.
Were you at all surprised by the scale of Pinterest and the success?
I was surprised.
New question coming in.
Yeah, no, I was surprised by the scale. I mean, I did not anticipate it would get to be as big as it did, but I thought, right, like I always come back. Everyone had, some place where they used to take their magazines, rip out a page, put it in a file to come back to, later when they might be able to acquire it or use it, right? And so this notion of first that you could, let all these creatives have a place where they could store and organize their ideas, I thought that was sort of foundational. And then the other thing is that when Pinterest was starting, the web was just really starting to move from like what I'll call text to photos. So the whole notion of being able to do visual things in a better way and to have built a platform that was, geared towards that. And as we've kind of moved towards, short videos as another way of expressing. So all those things are like what I guess I'd call ripe areas for an organization that helps visual learners learn and discover, to continue to build organically on that, what I think is a fundamental human condition.
Yep. Beautiful. Beautiful. I just kind of lost my quick train of thought, but how, from the digital natives now, moving kind of into like customers and changing behaviors and getting ideas, I guess the question is, how many ideas are you hearing every week in your kind of day-to-day life? And how are some frameworks that you can give us to get those ideas and that funding within the organization? Because the roles can be somewhat similar, where you're sitting and maybe getting that kind of CFO or buy-in for, we want to test this idea. What are some of the frameworks and things that you look for in formulating and articulating kind of that idea, the business value, the value to the company and the shareholders, to really get some buy-in?
Okay, and it's not easy, so I both understand that, and I guess so I sort of start with this notion that if you have if you it's hard to like make products anymore, right? Just as a general rule, because products have life cycles, inventory, a lot of complexity, right? I tend to work more as a result in software, because those software processes can create great value, and to the degree that you solve the problem, and it's a problem that a lot of people have, the digital cost of copying the same original solution is pretty low. So that's a bias that I have, is how can you create software to improve processes that are repetitive and not necessarily low value, but are ones where if you could reduce it to something that was self-serve, it would be better. So to come back to your specific question, like the things that I do is I try to say, okay, so think about places where they're inefficient in the way your company runs. Or think about markets that are kind of adjacent to markets that you already serve, where you can come in. Like my rule of thumb is, in terms of a framework, and this is sort of like pattern recognition, I go and try to say, if something's done today and it costs $100 to do it, can I figure out a way to do it with software that it'll only be 10? If I'm trying to do something where I'm going to grow into a new market, can I think of a service or a way of stitching together an unmet need, and then use that to be able to accelerate growth? So if I can try to use an example, right? I'm working on one right now where I won't name the company, just to be confidential, but they work in in providing 401ks to businesses, and that process hasn't really changed in like 50 years. And what they figured out how to do was, they had a guy from Google who could architect a platform that would allow everyone to be able to take the information that they had in their narrow window of the way they interact and put that into this database that would be searchable. They could maintain bilateral conversations so that you didn't just drive it down to a commodity. And by doing this, they could, save on like literally trillions of dollars, 0.5% per annum in the value chain. That's huge, right? Because like 1 basis point matters. And it was simply a case of looking at looking at how one could go about solving a problem that hadn't changed in a way where everyone would benefit. I mean, they literally give it away free to two sides of the market, and they get paid by the third side. It's a $15 trillion problem.
Yeah.
That's the kind of things that I go and I look for. And so it's sort of like, look for something where there's a large servable market, conceptualize how, if you can remove friction from it, you're going to be able to capture some amount of that reduction in friction. And then, you go out and you basically make a pitch to people who and so I'll go out to my network of people who I collaborate with, pitch them the idea. It has to have a high return. So that's the equivalent of what the CFO is going to want to know in an intrapreneur kind of place. But it always keeps coming back to these fundamentals of look for the frictions in the way you do things that can be improved in a world where, right, we're going to be connected all the time with the Internet of Things, and you'll just be able to learn stuff, get that data that is low cost to be able to suck in, so you can continuously improve your processes.
Cool. And going back to taking something that's $100 and driving it down, can I do it in a new modern way for $10? Do you also look at the scale and exponential growth of my 10th customer will cost me $100 to get, and my millionth customer will cost me that same $100? That at some point, the concept of platforms and allowing users to come into your community, the cost differential from 10 to 1,000.
Yep. So maybe the way I kind of look at it, and some of this is, I don't know, inside baseball, but I hope I won't be too dense. So the rule I always use is, what's your cost to acquire a customer? Mm-hmm. And then what's the lifetime value of that customer, assuming you continue to service them well, as measured by revenue or the gross profits that they do. And the key thing on most software as a services, which I think is where I keep telling you I go back to, is, are you solving a set of problems that says that person's not going to switch off of you for at least 5 years, because you get into these feedback loops, right, where the people you converse with your customers to continue to build value, and so they continue to be willing to subscribe to your software service, and maybe actually buy more if you've solved more problems in their stack of things that they need to do to become more efficient. So I think every company goes back and forth between trying to grow revenue by introducing new services and being more efficient at what they do. Most companies get stuck in, they try to get more and more efficient in their baseline things, but they're much less willing to kind of ever fail on, a new idea. And I sort of just go, you should absolutely, get together with your senior leaders to say, we're going to have an experimentation budget, which is some percentage of, whatever scale organization you have, and you're going to go that way. I mean, I will admit in an embarrassing way, I've probably helped start, I don't know, 80 or 90 companies in my life. I've had 10 separate times where I've personally lost $1 million on things that when $1 million mattered a hell of a lot in my personal net worth. And you have to be resilient enough to go, okay, I was wrong. What did I learn? How can I get better? But you go back up and you bat again, right? You keep going. You have a resilience, or whatever you want to call it, to keep experimenting, even if the first one fails. And then the other corollary to that is, I've gotten much better now that if I have a hypothesis, that if the initial data comes in, badly, I'll cut my losses quicker and move on to the next thing, and not get kind of wed to, if I just do, if I double down, 6 months from now, we'll solve it. I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I'll probably let them fail once on some deadline, but if they're not doing it consistently, cut it, start over again, and don't don't get crucified for failing. Step
Yes.
up and go for it.
And there's some interesting research on our tendency to double down on bad ideas, because
Yes.
it's harder to fish and cut bait, or whatever that
Well,
term is. So,
it's sort of like, one of the things that I heard, there's a guy named John Donahue at one point in time was like the head of Bain, and before that he was and after that he was the head of eBay. And he used to say that he would walk into his Bain partners meeting, and anything that, even any question he'd even raise, he already knew like 95% what the answer was. And he tried to apply that when he went to eBay. And he said the biggest lesson he learned is he would have taken more risk and actually been willing to fail like, 60% of the time, even 65% of the time, because you would have gotten exposed to more ideas that could be game changing.
oh, that's really interesting. I like that.
Yep.
I think we will start looking to the audience for some questions. I see some questions coming in, so we give enough time. Sam, or I can.
Sure. Yes. Well, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, David, for that really interesting, interesting conversation. I've got loads of questions, but
Good. Bring them.
we do have some questions from other people as well. So, if people want to keep posting them on the Q&A tab, that would be fantastic. We will do that. Please try not to use the chat, because I can't post them onto the Q&A, and they're not necessarily visible to everybody if you use the chat. But we will get to everybody's without a doubt. So I'm just going to start really at the top of our list. So we have the first question is, how can companies balance the challenge of servicing micro communities whilst operating at a global scale?
Totally fair point, and that is almost like the quintessential question. And I guess I kind of come from the school that you make small bets and try those micro communities to begin with, because the consequence of failure is low, but have a screening process by which you think some of those micro communities can either be aggregated into broader communities that can scale relative to a multi-global organization. And then, one of the beauties of the internet is a lot of small communities can be stitched together on the long tail to end up getting to be a reasonably large servable market. And I won't go into all the boring details of it, but that's kind of like, if you go and you look at Pinterest as an example, that's just the aggregation of literally thousands to hundreds of thousands of small micro communities that have all come together because there was a sort of horizontal need. And so that's the way I would answer that question. I hope that's responsive.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you. So we've had another question here, which is, what is the right time to share or test a plan for a new digital business platform with thought leaders in your target industry? And how would you assess the risk of other people stealing that idea?
Again, great question. And
That's an entrepreneur question.
right. And so I'm of two minds on this. And so I'll state it, right? So being able to try to patent ideas, I'm an investor in a firm that has 300 patents in wireless. It's been one of the toughest things I've done in my life. We're like 12 years in, and maybe it's going to go somewhere. I think patents anymore are overrated because they're so hard to get, and large companies can figure out workarounds. So you think you're protected, and you're really not. So my answer is, you should be willing to expose the idea if you're willing to work quickly on it, and if there's ways where, I guess what I'll call, you can have trade secrets that you don't reveal in the way you go about assembling it, because that's the only true protection that you have anymore, is what you can keep in your own organization. And someone can't reverse engineer it, and you're always going to run the risk you can get hacked anyway. So it just is in the nature of innovation. And, and my sense is I'll go for things earlier if I can find subject matter experts that I think can help me critically evaluate the opportunity.
That's a really great answer. Thank you. One of the things I was really struck by, I'm just going to jump in there. One of the things I was really struck by was this idea of friction as having some value, investment value in it. So we're kind of busy trying to take friction out of operational processes and systems, but it actually has some value. Sort of made me think about what we do for our customers as well. It's really interesting. So another question we have here is, this is a great question, are there sectors you would never consider investing in?
Yeah, the ones where I've lost money already, but no. I have kind of taken upon myself that two things I will try to avoid. I'll try to avoid investing in new materials, because I found out the hard way that the process to be able to figure out whether they can deliver the value proposition that they have as a matter of science is much harder, and it can either fail on the actual effectiveness of it, or where I end up blowing it several times was scalably manufacturing it. You can do it on the bench, but you can't get it to scale in a way that it is profitable. And then the sort of second one where I've stepped back from it, or maybe I should say I've decided to do it in investing in venture funds instead of doing it myself, is I'm not super keen on pharmaceuticals for drugs and whatnot. For sort of a similar thing is that the formulations to be able to get breakthroughs, I've certainly messed up on not understanding the science as well. And then when you go through the FDA, it just takes a long time before you can figure out whether or not you have something there. So, but, and I've never met a biochemist or a biologist who doesn't go, oh, the next one will definitely work, so give me another, pick the number $250,000 to run another set of experiments. And what I've basically found out is every one of those is a binary bet. And so, at best, binary bet, maybe even worse. So I've decided I'm going to try to avoid that. I'll try to have somewhat higher probability outcomes.
Eventually, it'll be like software development, and it'll be built a lot easier to.
That's what I think. I mean, I do really believe that, that there are things going on at like the Broad Institute at Harvard at that intersection of neural networks applied to biosciences that are starting to harness the computer to find those needles in a haystack, so that the bets are not binary, but much, much better. But I don't know those people, so that's why I'm staying out of it.
Well, that's a great lead to our next question, which is how much does trust factor into those investments? So like in the trust that you have in the people that you may know, people you don't know.
So you've just hit my Achilles heel. As a person, I'm optimistic and trusting. Every time any of the really bad ones, I made a bad call on the person. They were probably a subject matter expert genius, but they might not have been a good manager of a team. And I, probably fell a little bit more for that they would learn the team management, and what they really were like a single practitioner that was brilliant, like a true inventor, but they didn't know how to play in the room well. And then the sort of corollary to that is I've had my heart broken a few times when, somebody who I actually thought I really knew well gets to that point where they never failed in their life. And this is their, company that they're doing. And they come to you and they tell you, like, I know we're not on plan, but I've got this. If you just give me this much more, we'll break through. And I've given them the money, and then I come back and find out after the fact that nope, they were lying to me, that they just couldn't take it as an ego matter, that they hadn't succeeded. And so they were willing to basically traffic in my trust in them to pursue their own ego-driven ends. And it didn't end well for either of us, because probably in 100% of the times I've had to fire them, and oftentimes it leads to shutting down the company some months after that event occurred.
Oh.
Were there any early indicators, like when you look back and that continue, like doing a retro on the people side of, were there things that you saw from pattern recognition that you're like, oh, this is popping up, this seems familiar, last time it ended not that well, here's how you can get ahead of ego versus fact? I can kind of empathize with someone who is, I'm not saying they're deceitful or not, who you're like, I
No, and
believe,
they're
like
not.
right, I believe I can do this.
No, and that's the thing, that like it's like their best strengths are their worst weaknesses. I mean, you could go into a whole Freudian,
Yeah,
like that's the thing I actually feel like I learned. So the best predictor of success is that the person that you're asking to do something has done it before, right?
right.
So I'm much more like behavioral in my interviewing of people. Have you done something very similar to what we're being asked to do in this new startup in your past? So they can tell me a narrative. And then I'm much more explicit about what I'll just call like hypothesis testing. Some people call it A/B testing, but I want to know really specifically, what are you going to do in the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? How will you collect the data to prove that you've mastered whatever it is? So we're not arguing about the person's judgment, we're just arguing about the data. That, I think, takes it away from, kind of the ego, and tries to just make it be about the data, which I find, most people are willing to have an intellectual debate about, as opposed to making it so personal.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got a few more questions. So, someone here is really interested in the idea of C grades challenging everything. I think you said early on about challenging assumptions as part of the job. And how do you help to get C grades into that headspace so that they can do that?
So I really feel like that the only way that happens if you get them out of their environment, right? How does somebody get to be a C grade? They've basically presumably mastered all the things that the business has done well during their career. And so now they've gotten to the top, and my general experience is, okay, I've made it. I want my role to persist. So I'm going to continue to do the things I've done that have made me be successful, even if the world's changing around them. So I think that the number one thing that C grade people have to do is get out of their internal focus and go listen to people who, have totally different perspectives. I mean, whether it's TED Talks, whether it's going back to, talks on at conferences, but it's to hear people who have discongruent ideas about the way to do what they do, and then the confidence and intellectual curiosity that they'll start to look at and encourage people in their organization to question the fundamentals, because you don't want people who are kind of like what I call Groundhog Day. Every day they want it to be the same. You want people who just wake up every morning, want to see how it can be different, and want to see how do they filter and bring perspectives into their organization that allows them to see what's possible, right? And someone's got to drive that. So the good C-suite people get out of internal and out to external and question everything.
Brilliant. So given your experience of working with entrepreneurs and your thoughts on the enterprise being able to drive innovation on their own versus relying on being outside, what are your thoughts on the enterprise being able to drive innovation on their own rather than relying on outside help and thought leadership from other people?
Well, I think it's just like be balanced about it, right? Like, so if you can have Slack resources in some like equivalent of a skunkworks group and encourage that behavior, I don't know what the right size is. Do you do 5% of your budget into that, 1%? You can sort of decide that as with your board and with your stakeholders of what you're going to do. I feel like you go outside if you feel like there are, themes that you want to be able to explore that you don't have people who have that expertise, and you can't offer them a career path where if they go down that, the risk and return to them, in terms of their career is an equilibrium, right? So then how can you do it? Well, you could sort of go, maybe I'll outsource some R&D if I can find some, you can set up a corporate venture group or some sort of group that's scanning who are the new people who are doing what you do in a different way, and just allocate money to it so that you can have conversations. I think the thing that gets hard is when you want to have like your team that's executing a business pair up with a some SaaS software company, because they need to hack to get going, and you need processes, because that's the way all large corporations have kind of got it down to. They're trying to make sure everything's in control. It's like Mars and Venus, right? They can't talk to each other, so their expectations are going to be misaligned. And large corporates, I feel like, because they're always on these like quarterly cycles, they'll immediately go back when things get tough in the quarter to focus in on their primary responsibilities, because they've got a set of accountabilities in that regard. And so you don't have that consistency of interaction with the outside if you try to do that. But it can be done, but it takes top level execs who want to see the experiment run, and then supporting them, supporting the people who are doing the work in a way where the first time things get challenging, they don't cut the effort.
Yeah, cut them off.
Yeah, right. And it's natural for both sides. That's the dominating pressure of these big companies, that they're on this quarterly cadence. And that's where I find, like, that's where being privately owned, it changes the way you can sort of approach problem solving and hacking your way to growth. That is at the fundamental tension in trying to innovate inside large corporates.
Well, that's a great question follow on from that, which is more personal, which is, if you don't mind, what is a good example of a big pivot you've had to make, and how successful was it?
Well, like I'll go back to one that we talked about, previously. So when I had this market research company a long time ago, right? We kind of came in. We had two basic products. We had a product that was like a desktop, early version of SaaS, where for like $99 a month, if you were kind of any marketing person, you could do these easy like surveys that were not nearly as sophisticated as what market research was being done at the time. But if you were a brand manager, it was a way for you to kind of do a hack to figure out a concept or an ad concept or things like that. That was a really good value proposition, but we took the price point up, from to like $5.99 a month per seat, right? And SurveyMonkey came in and did it at $2.99, and we were making tons of money, so we were all going wahoo. SurveyMonkey was cleaning our clock by offering a better value proposition with this reduced form and scaling it. So we got killed on that. So we had pivoted that we were going to go up market into real enterprise work. And the thing that we learned in doing that was we had to come up with a lower cost way to serve those people. So what we did was we actually ended up opening a whole Indian subsidiary to be able to have workers that who could productize like the services at a much lower cost than we would have been able to do in Marin County, right? So the pivot that we did is we ended up moving upscale. We got to a point where we had like P&G, General Mills, a bunch of the biggest consumer packaged goods companies in the world. But ultimately, that was a flawed strategy, because what we ended up figuring out was we were in a project-based business. So every quarter we had to re-underwrite our business to be able to get the factory full. If we had stayed with the sort of simple SaaS model and gone with SurveyMonkey, that would have been, or the SurveyMonkey competitor, that was growing way faster, was way simpler, because if you go and you look at it, there wasn't a service component. We had designed a simple software as a service. The incremental cost to do it, there was no people required, right? It was all self-service. And, if we had gone down to $299, we probably would have gotten it much better. So, so it's a thing where the CEO that we had at the time had come out of General Mills, and he was used to making things. He had run like he was like the cost reduction guy at General Mills. And so his playbook was outsource the high cost to India. And that was tactically right, but long-term was the wrong strategy.
That's really interesting. We've got time for just one or two more questions. So a kind of follow-on question for that is that, are there any successful business models in your portfolio that have got like a user or consumer direct pay for the service they use rather than monetization through ads?
Ads. Let's see. I have a couple where I go, they're still in process, so I don't know whether they're going to be successful, right? But one is, so we're trying to build. This is like a kind of obscure thing. Of all the trucks in America at any point in time that are on the road, 30% are empty. Why is that? Well, because most trucks get dispatched from, making it up, Chicago to go to San Francisco. And when it leaves Chicago, it doesn't have a load to take back from San Francisco to Chicago, where it has to end up, at the end of the week or whatever. So what we've gone and done is we built a database that has like, I don't know, we're up to like, I want to say like 25,000 truck routes by day, and how much capacity is going over. That's all just like a, AI engine where we suck stuff out and put it in there so we can know what the capacity is. And then we're also starting to get to the point where we have all the pricing. So we know what Chicago to San Francisco goes for a typical kind of over the road truck. So if we pull this off, right, we are literally creating real-time capacity and pricing for all trucks. And we don't charge that much, right, to the individual, truck broker or shipper, because we're still kind of, deficient in having it be completely ubiquitous. But we're starting to get to the point, right, where, I don't know, with like 20% penetration, our pricing's actually statistically pretty damn good. So if you're someone who says, well, if I call, a truck and say I'll offer it at this price, you're probably going to win. And if we can get there, right, we'll have all these people who pay to be able to look at our capacity and data in real time, to be able to find the place where if they need to ship a load, where's capacity? If they have a truck and they want to get a load, where are people who have, the need to ship at a point in time, so that they can, and then you add a telematics element that we're tracking them on GIS maps so we know where they are. So if there's a snowstorm in, the Colorado, that's going to delay it to get to San Francisco, we can find somebody else to be able to make sure that the service is delivered. And that's, and that's one where the users pay, but the utility of being able to aggregate all this data means any individual point in the, overall hub and spoke of the country is getting better information than they could from their little hub that didn't have access to this.
That sounds like the classic example of removing friction from a complex.
If we can pull it off. I mean, it's work in progress, but it's interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And saving fossil fuels too. You have a third, right? Like the efficiency on the environment, and how empty trucks mean we're
Yep.
wasting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, listen, we have come to the end of our time here. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I hope you found our time interesting, and we will be doing the recorded version shortly. I just want to say a big thank you, Dave, for your time today. Thank you for sharing your insights with us and your experience so willingly. I must admit, I find the idea of an angel investor broken-hearted at how things are done really, really warming and empathetic. So thank you for telling us those stories. Lisa, thank you for your time too. You make it look effortless. And those of us who've done this before know that it's not. So we really appreciate it. And then finally, to you, our audience, thank you for joining us. Our next talk is on Thursday, May the 5th, next week at 6 p.m. UK British Summer Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's titled Operability, You Build It, You Run It at John Lewis and Partners, which is a UK retailer. And we have Simon Skelton from John Lewis and Steve Smith from Equal Experts. You can register at the URL there, but if you just go to our website, you can find it. So thanks, everybody.